Hello, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Shazza Chidello.
This week, as Georgia's recount confirms Biden was the winner, we'll look at what a presidential transition should look like and why Trump's conspiracy mongering could be costing lives.
We're going to take one last look at the latest vote count and ask campaign veteran Bob Schramm about where to now for polling and advertising. Are they both broken?
But first, some of you will remember the 1970s sitcom Happy Days, set in 1950s Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the all-American Cunningham family. For a time, Happy Days ranked alongside MASH as one of the most popular shows on television. But while MASH grew more serious and critically acclaimed over time, culminating in an emotional finale watched by more Americans than any show in history, Happy Days got progressively sillier, up to the point that the lead character, Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli, found himself water skiing, still in his leather jacket, trying to jump over a shark. Since then, jumping the shark has come to mean the point at which things just got ridiculous, desperate and dumb. Well, today, President Donald Trump jumped the shark. And of course, it began with a tweet.
Important news conference today by lawyers on a very clear and viable path to victory. Pieces are very nicely falling into place. RNC at 12 p.m.
And at the appointed hour, while Trump's $20,000 a day lawyer Rudy Giuliani was there, sweating hair dye and drinking water like a vaudeville ventriloquist, it was another Trump lawyer, Sidney Powell, who outlined their latest, craziest allegation to date.
What we are really dealing with here and uncovering more by the day is the massive influence of communist money through Venezuela, Cuba, and likely China in the interference with our elections here in the United States. The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, and the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election after one constitutional referendum came out the way he did not want it to come out. We have one very strong witness who has explained how it all works. His affidavit is attached to the pleadings of Lynn Wood in the lawsuit he filed in Georgia. It is a stunning, detailed affidavit because he was with Hugo Chavez while he was being briefed on how it worked. He was with Hugo Chavez when he saw it operate to make sure the election came out his way. That was the express purpose for creating this software. He has seen it operate, and as soon as he saw the multiple states shut down the voting on the night of the election, he knew the same thing was happening here, that was what had gone on.
So, just to recap, Chaz, Trump's lawyers allege massive influence of communist money on the election. Cuban, Venezuelan and possibly Chinese too. That election software used in 27 states and made by Dominion, Smartmatic and others were created at the direction of Venezuela's late president Hugo Chavez so he could rig elections. And they claim to have a witness who was with Chavez to see it work. And he realised on election night that the US election was also being rigged. Sounds perfectly plausible to me, Chaz. I don't know about you.
Okay, let's just be clear about what they're saying here. What they're saying is that, number one, let's leave aside the fact that if they were rigging this election, they only chose to rig one part of the election, and they didn't choose to rig the Senate or the House or the state legislatures or anything else. But also, if that's the case, the Trump administration has screwed up massively. They have dropped the ball in a huge way, that they let this massive foreign conspiracy occur for who knows how long. And they just completely didn't notice anything until just now, when Sidney Powell came to the rescue and unlocked it all like the Scooby-Doo kids. But before we get into the fact-checking of this, we should say that there was zero evidence provided. Like, I know Rudy Giuliani waved around an affidavit with highlights on it, but
yes,
they didn't actually show us the affidavit.
Yeah.
They just kept on saying They just kept on saying about what they were going to do. Oh, we're going to show this. We've got so much evidence. Sidney Powell's been doing this now for 2 weeks on cable news. She's been going from Fox News to Fox Business to Newsmax, saying things like this.
We have so much evidence, I feel like it's coming in through a fire hose.
Wow. Wow.
Wow, fire hose of evidence.
That's right. And she said things like, I'm going to release the Kraken and so forth. She's been talking tough, and all of Trump's fanboys online going, wow, oh my God, well, she wouldn't say that unless she had the goods. But rather than telling us about all the evidence that she has and she's going to show us, I don't know why they haven't gone to court yet. She spent 2 weeks saying what she's going to do without going to court. Now, they say they're going to court tomorrow. I don't know where. I'm not sure if they've announced it yet. I haven't seen any word of that. Georgia's certifying tomorrow, so they better do it fast. But why haven't they been in court before now if they've got this fire hose of evidence? You know?
Well, given that there have been dozens of cases that have gone before various federal and state judges around the United States in the last 2.5 weeks. And this is a point that Republican Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska made after seeing Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani's performance earlier today. And he said, look, it's pretty significant to note that they talk about all this stuff on Fox News and One America Network and on Hannity and everything else, but when their lawyers come before the judges, they're not making allegations of widespread systemic fraud, vote rigging, none of this. They're talking about 1 or 2 isolated cases. We're talking, one dead person who apparently voted, all this kind of stuff. They're talking very, very small beer when they're in a position where there are legal sanctions for lawyers who lie to judges.
That's a great point. And Fox News actually picked up on that with a great observation about Rudy Giuliani in Pennsylvania, which I think I got a clip for as well.
Now, in Pennsylvania, Giuliani continued to claim widespread voter fraud in Philadelphia, even though he has already said in court, and I quote, "This is not a fraud case." So what he's saying in public, not under oath, is different from what he said in court.
Well done, Fox News. Once again, this whole last 3 weeks has been hilarious because Fox News, the news department, have actually been the best fact checkers of anyone.
Yeah.
While their opinion department has just been going absolutely feral, talking to Sidney Powell and all the rest of it. But look, I know what CNN think of Rudy Giuliani's performance because they made it very clear with one of their typically neutral and professional chyrons at the bottom of the screen there that you can see. But I want to know what you think of the allegations, John. Fact check them for me.
Are you really going to make me do this?
Yes.
OK, well, look, this is either the biggest story since Watergate or it is the biggest load of garbage since Trump said that Obama was born in Kenya and not entitled to be president of the United States. And it turns out, sorry to disappoint, it's the latter. Yeah. According to the Department of Homeland Security's rumour control website, the majority of votes in this election were cast on paper ballots or using machines that produce a paper audit trail, which allow for tabulation audits to be conducted from the paper record in the event of any issues emerging with the voting system software. So if there are any doubts with software, you can always go back and you can check it out. You can check it. Well, last week, when this conspiracy theory started being peddled by Rudy on Fox News and Sydney elsewhere, the same US government cybersecurity agency felt compelled to announce, quote, "While we know there are many unfounded claims and opportunities for misinformation about the process of our elections, we can assure you we have the utmost confidence in the security and integrity of our elections, and you should too." And, of course, all the election administrators, Republican and Democrat, state by state, are saying this has been fine. There are no widespread problems here. The fact checkers have gone through all of this line by line, and if you are interested, you might want to check some of them out. But the key points are this. 1, Dominion, the software company they talk about, it's a Canadian company. It does not have any ownership ties to Venezuela. It operates in 28 American states, including ones that Trump won, like Ohio and Florida. And the problems in Michigan weren't with the software, it was human error. There's not a software problem. The other firm that they keep talking about, Smartmatic, is an American company, headquartered in London these days. It did have some business in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez's successor, in fact, Nicolas Maduro, exaggerated election turnout figures by about 1 million in 2017 in a National Assembly vote. Now, that sounds like it could be pretty significant, except that was a vote which opposition groups boycotted, And he didn't do that manipulation through the Smartmatic system, but in fact, it was Smartmatic that blew the whistle on Nicolas Maduro and said, hey, look what this guy is up to. Now,
that's important.
Like, it's pretty important. Like all conspiracy theories, though, this one is bending and morphing around the facts. And once people buy into the conspiracy theory, the facts don't seem to matter. They do not change their mind. And it's probably fitting that Donald Trump's political career, which began with birtherism, is ending, at least for now, with what is clearly another quite ridiculous and bogus claim.
Yeah, look, it is noteworthy what you say about them changing their story. Like, over the last 2 weeks, I've heard 5 or 6 contradictory claims about Dominion software and what supposedly went wrong. So the fact that they can't make up their mind is a sign that they aren't necessarily to be trusted.
And they're not even trying to prove this conspiracy theory. Like a lot of conspiracy theories, the takeaway of whether it's JFK or 9/11 or the moon landing or whatever, the takeaway, like the meta-narrative is the government can't be trusted, elites are lying to you, the media is wrong, believe us instead, or at least don't believe anything you hear, therefore our lies no worse than anyone else's lies. And that's where this is clearly designed to just create an environment of doubt and suspicion, because at the end of the day, the play is to get potentially impressionable, pressurable Republican officials at the county and state level, be they election authorities or state legislators, to suddenly turn around and go, I'm going to ignore 150,000 votes in Michigan and flip it to Trump.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but I just wanted to pick up your point about the way these machines work. The Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, made very clear that the Georgia machines, at least, operate the way you just said.
These machines have a verifiable paper ballot trail. You look at your choices. Did you want President Trump, Vice President Biden, or Joe Jorgensen? Your selection. And then you put it on the scanner, and that's when it was scanned, and that's where the tabulation will happen. So nothing is, the ballot marking device is just marking your ballot, so there's no question about what your choices were. And so we did, though, an audit of the machines to make sure they weren't hacked. But when you count the paper ballots and then take it back to what was reported in the machines and they line up, it's pretty clear and conclusive proof that the votes were accurately counted.
So to be clear, I was very clear about this. When you're doing a hand count afterwards, you're looking at the papers they marked with pencils and pens, right? Yeah. That's what you're looking at. So there's no doubt that those votes are what the voters intended. And then you cross-check that with you cross-check what people physically wrote with what the machine says. And that is exactly what Georgia did. So, what did they find?
We're doing a hand count because some people were questioning the accuracy of our election machines. It was Dominion voting systems. And what we're seeing in over 50 counties already, there was not one single vote difference. Another 30 counties, it was just one vote plus or minus. And the other 25 counties, it was plus or minus less than 10 vote difference. So it's very, very close. And then we actually have done an audit of the actual machines in 6 different counties, randomized audit by an outside forensic investigator, ProBNB, to substantiate that these machines are accurately counting everything.
Okay, so to be clear there, at the very least, there are no issues in Georgia. Proven no issues in Georgia. Impossible for there to be issues in Georgia, okay? So at the very least, that's the case. Then on top of that, the whole logic of the Trump theory is just wrong. They said that essentially the cities, these urban centres, where all this rigging happens, and that's how Biden won. But Biden didn't even do particularly well in the cities. He actually got less votes in Philadelphia Centre than Hillary did in 2016.
So if they were rigging it, they weren't rigging particularly well.
No, they weren't. And Biden did worse in Detroit and Milwaukee too, as a proportion of the votes compared to Trump. Look at this graph of the votes in Georgia, for instance. Biden did much better in all the areas around Atlanta. That's the blue, and that blue circle there, rather than in Atlanta, which is the center of the circle, which isn't blue. To put numbers on it, He gained 7 points in high-income areas, 6 points in majority college graduate areas, 6 points in suburban areas, but he lost ground in black areas more than 80%, as in but where there's more than 80% black people, and majority Hispanic areas. Black voters as a proportion of the Georgia vote actually went down from 27.7% to 27%. It was the lowest black vote share in Georgia since 2006 in those areas that were supposedly rigged. Okay, so that theory was wrong. You might have also heard Trump going on about how in Detroit there were more ballots than people. He's tweeted that about 10 times. He loves tweeting that. That's wrong. Detroit reported 250,000 votes in the election. That's fewer than half of Detroit's registered voters, 37% of its total population as of 2019, okay? What actually happened, is there were more absentee votes counted than the number of absentee votes they thought they received. That always happens.
Right.
Always happens. How many votes are we talking about, by the way? 357 votes. That's what we're talking about. You don't use that number much. 357 votes, or 0.02% of the total ballots cast in Detroit. In an election where the margin was 140,000, okay? Now, yes, that was across 42% of the precincts, but in 2016, they had irregularities across 80% of the precincts, but that did not stop the Wayne County Electoral Board from certifying those results in 2016 without any concern. So, John, what happened to the Wayne County Electoral Board this time?
Well, there is a word that does quite accurately describe what happened in Wayne County this week, but I don't think, given the family-friendly time slot, I can use it. But suffice to say, what is usually the formality, you have the county electoral officials, they're appointed on a bipartisan basis, so 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, they just certify the result in Wayne County. Now, what the 2 Republicans on the county board tried to do was to say, look, we're suspicious about Detroit because of the higher number of absentee ballots than we expected in Detroit, so let's just not count any of the Detroit votes at all and just count the rest of Wayne County, which is more Republican, Detroit itself, more Democrat, more black folks there.
So to be clear, because of the 0.02% of disputed votes, throw out the 99.98% of the votes, which weren't disputed.
Yeah, so let's certify everything but Detroit. Let's just not count those votes. A little bit like what Lindsey Graham was apparently trying to do as well in Georgia. Essentially just say...
The jury's out in that. There might have been a misinterpretation.
Yeah, but, you know, this idea that if you cast some doubt over a count, let's just say let's not worry about any of those. So that was the suggestion. So the 2 Republicans surprised everybody on Tuesday night by not voting to certify, so it became a 2-2 split. Now, there was an outcry over that, both sides. There was pressure brought to bear. Ultimately, they did certify, and so those results then go on up the line to state officials from the county officials, and then the state legislature signs off on it, and it goes to the Electoral College, and it becomes the vote. So that was all fine. Unfortunately, after they kind of reneged and then voted to certify, they got phone calls from President Trump himself, who at the same time then invited all of the Republicans in the Michigan state legislature to come to the White House tomorrow, just for a stop by, for a grip and grin.
He's just very social.
It is. And I mean, if you're in Michigan right now, why wouldn't you want to go to a super spreader event at the White House? That'd be a terrific thing to do in the run-up to Thanksgiving. So,
sorry, I need to jump in there for a second, but you might think that was a pressuring call.
Yeah.
No. Monica Palmer, one of the 2 members, she said it was not pressure.
Yep.
It was genuine concern for my safety.
Yes, because she was getting trolled, actually from both sides, a significant amount of pressure, and she was getting a lot of criticism at the time. In the end, she voted to certify, but then the following day, after more pressure was applied, the Trump campaign then got her to sign another one of these U-Butte affidavits to say, in fact, that she wanted to retract her earlier certifying vote. Well, state officials have already said, no take backies. You can't do that. It's certified. We're done with you. Go away. But, you know, a lot of people said at the time, this looks like a kind of an administrative coup. This looks like blatant racism because the votes they're looking to disqualify are black votes. So it got a lot of people very upset this week. The fact that the president is wading right into the middle of all of this and that this is clearly... If he had his way, he and Rudy Giuliani right now, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get Republican officials from the county level and the state level to keep doing this kind of stuff, basically saying, we're going to ignore the votes, we're going to give it to you instead. Now, it still seems that this is as ridiculous and implausible as we have all been assuming. But this week, there was a period of time in between those two votes to not certify, then to certify, where it actually seemed like, my God, this is not just happening in tweets, this is happening in the real world. And it's pretty scary because it's being driven by the president and his lawyer. Yeah,
look, we have to be very clear about this, that they are hoping to overturn a democratic election here.
Yeah.
That's the game plan. I mean, that's not conspiracy theory from me. That's what his lawyer tweeted when she thought the certification in Wayne County had been stopped for good. She tweeted, if the state board follows suit, the Republican state legislature will select the electors, as in not the people, the legislature. Huge win for Donald Trump. The overthrowing of the people's vote, in her view, would be a huge win for Donald Trump, in her words.
Yeah.
That's just undeniable. I'm so glad, well, it seems like they've been thwarted, at least in Michigan.
Yep.
And if they're thwarted in Michigan and Georgia, they're running out of states to try and mess with.
Yeah, my understanding that the system in Pennsylvania is there's no scope for that anyway. And to their credit, Pennsylvania Republicans have basically said, we'll have no truck with any of this. We are not going to have a separate slate of electoral college electors coming out of the legislature here. We're certifying this result.
And Michigan, by the way, their state legislature said the same thing. Their Senate majority, I'll give them credit, their Republican Senate majority leader said, no way, we're going with the vote, which might be part of the reason why they changed their mind, the Board of Electors as well, because they realised, what's the point? The state legislature isn't going to play ball.
Yep.
So that is good. There was actually one bit of electoral interference, though, which hasn't been talked about so much.
Yeah.
This is the Georgia Secretary of State also made this clear. There were 24,000 Republicans who voted absentee in the primary, the Republican primary, but didn't vote at all in the general election.
Interesting.
And he makes the point, that's odd. They're voting in the Republican primary, which doesn't matter at all. You'd think they'd vote in the election. Now, you'd think they'd be pretty keyed up. He suggests that maybe if Trump hadn't been going so hard on absentee votes and didn't suppress his own vote, his own absentee vote, he would have received those 24,000 absentee votes and he would have won Georgia by 10,000 votes.
Extraordinary.
How about that?
How about that? Well, the last time an incumbent president of the United States lost their bid for re-election was way back in 1992, President George Bush, defeated by Bill Clinton. Mickey Cantor was chairman of the Clinton campaign that year, and he went on to serve as US Commerce Secretary in the Clinton administration. And he's with us now from Los Angeles. Mickey, I realise it's been 8 or 9 years since we spoke to you on the program, so welcome back to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
We are. John, we ought to speak every 8 or 9 years regardless.
That's a deal. Look, it seems at the moment that President-elect Biden is trying to project calm and confidence, publicly at least, but behind the scenes. How concerned do you think the Biden team are about this situation?
Well, number one, they have no cooperation from the Trump administration. Trump has not conceded. He won't allow his people to engage in a transition process with the Biden folks. So in certain areas, particularly national security, the Biden folks are well behind, and they're going to be well behind in fighting COVID and understanding how to distribute the vaccines that companies are coming up with. 4 different vaccines, it looks like, have been developed, which is great news. But if you can't distribute them and the logistics don't work, it doesn't help.
Mickey, of course, the old saying goes there's only one president at a time, and that strictly, legally, is the case. So does it really matter that there's a bunch of stuff that Joe Biden doesn't know right now?
Oh, yes, he does. If you're going to have a seamless transition, in other words, your logistics, let's just take distributing the vaccine or vaccines that we'll distribute as a country. It doesn't, you can't stop it on the 20th and then maybe on the 22nd when people are in their chairs, in their offices, so on, try to start it up again when they don't even know what you've done before. So it does make a huge difference. Clearly in national security issues, it makes a difference. And so we are deeply concerned about this. Trump administration is not acting in a, let's say, responsible and patriotic manner. And there is a lot of pressure on the Trump administration, not helpful so far, to engage in a transition that will, of course, protect the American people and, frankly, protect the world.
Why is it that we're even in this situation at all? Aren't there laws in place dating back to the time of JFK that is meant to govern this process so this doesn't happen?
Oh, a president of the United States can have control over the various offices and what they do or don't do, and whether they engage in the transition or not. We believed, being very naive, that no administration would not engage in a transition with a peaceful transfer of power and an effective transfer of power, even more so. And yet it's happening.
It's still more than 3 weeks until the date in mid-December where the election result itself will be formalised. Do you suspect that that will also be the point of no return when the transition itself becomes formalised?
If you believe it's that the Trump administration doesn't believe that Biden has been elected and that you have to wait for the Electoral College to meet, then maybe so, but that's not the case. They know that Biden has won. He's won easily, frankly, and the margin of victory gets bigger and bigger every hour. It's now up to almost 6 million votes. Some believe it will get to 7 million votes. Well, that's a historic margin between presidential candidates. As you know, our elections are very close usually. And so therefore, just because the Electoral College votes 306 to 232, it's not going to, unfortunately, motivate the Trump administration as it appears to react today.
Mickey, that 1992 transition from Bush to Clinton, the process doesn't have the best reputation. It was certainly a rocky start for President Clinton, a couple of failed nominations early on. What are the lessons, do you think, from that period?
Oh, I thought it went pretty smoothly. I was in part of that, obviously. We met with our counterparts. They gave us major and large briefing books to read and to go through, to ask questions, to get up to date on what was going on in my area of trade negotiations. I was given Carla Hills, who, by the way, I knew. We both were lawyers from Los Angeles, so I knew Carla quite well. She did a fine job as USTR. Gave me a complete breakdown as to where we were or not with things like the Uruguay round, NAFTA, and so on. And it was quite helpful. And that happened in every area. Every transition between governments, particularly, of course, we didn't have a transition from 96 to 97 because the same administration. There were 4 of us who used to meet in the chief of staff's office, and that was the transition, but you didn't need one. But when it's a new administration, a different party coming in, you definitely need a transition, and we're not having it right now.
As for the handover of power itself in early 1993, how does that process involving then President Bush compare to what we're seeing now?
Totally different. President George H.W. Bush and his people could not have been more cooperative, certainly more patriotic, more coordinated with us, more willing to be helpful. That's just the opposite with the Trump administration, and that comes from the top. President Trump, for whatever reason, believes that he should or could hold on to power, won't even admit when it's so clear that he's lost the election, and continues to issue tweets where he asserts that he won the election. Of course, we know that's not true.
And what about the transfer of power itself and all the logistics involved on the 20th of January? While that inauguration is going on, there's a lot to be done back at the White House.
Well, certainly I was sitting up on and that was wonderful at the Capitol, sitting behind President Clinton when he took the oath of office right at noon. It's exactly at noon, and he was President of the United States at 12:45 and 12 and 45 seconds. At the White House, as you know, early in the morning, the incoming president or president-elect comes to the White House, greeted by the president they ride to the Capitol together. I'm not sure that's going to happen this time. There are many who assert that President Trump will not go to the inauguration, will not greet President-elect Biden at the White House. That would be a shame if that doesn't happen. You need traditions. You need traditions for a solid takeover and a bringing of the country together. And so we're afraid that President Trump will not do that, will not be around, and that President-elect Biden will just go to the Capitol and, of course, be sworn in. We'll have the usual socially distant ceremony in order to, and with masks on, in order to swear in the next president of the United States.
I wonder, Mickey, what do you think the net effect of all of this is going to be? Will it tend to delegitimise President-elect Joe Biden, or possibly delegitimise President Trump?
I think it's harmful to President Trump. Certainly, then President-elect Biden is quite aware of the situation. So are the American people. I don't think it would be harmful. Let me say something about one of the things that's helpful in this transition, that President-elect Biden is hardly a rookie when it comes to understanding the U.S. government. So therefore, he comes in with some advantages, even though there's not been the normal transition process. He knows what's going on. So does his people. They're very mature, very experienced, and therefore they have some advantages than an administration like we were in 1993 coming in January 20th, where many people had not been in government before.
And how much of this do you think is down to the very particular personality of Donald Trump? And how much of this is about the political reality, which is the control of the Senate is still up for grabs? We've got 2 runoff elections in early January. So the election is really not over.
Well, that's true. On the first part of your question, it's all due to, let's say, this President Trump's peculiar personality. He is not stable, and it's led to an unstable 4 years in the U.S. government. People will breathe a sigh of relief, even those who may have even voted for him, who like some of the things he did, that the lack of stability, the lack of maturity, the lack of clear policy, the lack of implementation will be over, and we'll have at least a government that is safe, secure, and mature in its operation.
Mickey Cantor, so good to talk to you again. Thanks for being with us on the Fireside Chat.
John, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
This week, a massive second wave of the coronavirus is sweeping across America. In excess of 1 million new cases this week alone. A return to school shutdowns in places like New York, curfews being imposed in California, mask mandates in previously very reluctant Republican states like Iowa and Utah have been enforced. And the Centers for Disease Control is now warning Americans against travelling for Thanksgiving next week. Chaz, we are seeing some very alarming numbers coming out of many parts of the United States, some parts that were not really affected by the first wave earlier in the fall in the US.
It's now everywhere except for Hawaii, essentially. In terms of the actual numbers, the daily new cases today are up to 190,000 today. The hospitalizations are now up to 80,000 today. Bear in mind that even in the first wave, there was the record was 60,000. Now it's 80,000. Daily deaths, there's about 2,000 today. The key, though, is that this is going to get much worse because there's a lag of about 3 weeks between a spike in cases and a spike in deaths. 3 weeks ago, the new cases were at 90,000 that day. They've doubled since then, over doubled. There's a 12-day lag between hospitalizations and deaths, generally. 12 days ago, hospitalizations were at 55,000. Now they're at 80,000. The hardest hit area in the whole of America was El Paso, and there are some disastrous images coming out of there. They've got the mobile morgues happening there like they did in New York, the trucks with freezers, and they just don't have enough hospital workers to be carting around the bodies. And so they've got prisoners, inmates, carting around these bodies into these mobile morgues, getting paid $2 an hour with a mask and stuff. It's even in Sweden, which is the the patron country of people saying, let's not do anything. Even there, because they've got their own problems there at the moment, they have a ban on gatherings of more than 8 people. So it's happening everywhere at the moment. Look, I'll give the Trump administration credit for Operation Warp Speed, like I always do, about the fact that even if they didn't fund, say, the Pfizer vaccine, they've put billions of dollars worth of pre-orders in to every single vaccine with any possibility of coming good, which gives them the certainty to go hard, and the private businesses, and it's paid off. We've got a vaccine in a year, well, 2 vaccines in a year rather than 4 years. But that's only so much credit you can give for that when they're doing nothing while this is happening. The only thing the administration, Trump hasn't even talked about it. No. The only thing the administration has said about this spike is Scott Atlas, in charge of their task force, who is now saying that people should rise up, but don't do it violently. Great, thanks, Scott.
And saying you should go ahead and go home for Thanksgiving and spend time with Grandma and Pop because it could be their last Thanksgiving. Well, you want to make sure of that. Go home and see them. Yeah, because this is going to be a real problem. And then, of course, you got Thanksgiving. A few weeks later, suddenly it's Christmas, Hanukkah, holiday season as well. This is bad. Yeah,
those numbers in December, they're going to. I'm certain they're going to break the 3,000 deaths per day barrier, which was the first wave.
But presidential leadership right now, any other president basically would be saying Thanksgiving this year has to be over a video conference call. Don't go and see your parents or your grandparents this year so that you can see them next year and for years to come. A simple public health message like that would probably be quite effective. But instead, we got silence.
Yes, we do.
All right, 2 weeks after he was declared president-elect of the United States by media outlets, Joe Biden is extending his lead in the popular vote today, close to 6 million now, with 51% of the national vote to President Trump's 47.2%. Still, while Biden's lead has continued to grow as expected, as mail-in votes are counted and larger Democratic states like California and New York tabulate their results as well, there is no doubt that while solid, Biden's victory isn't as overwhelming as most of the polls were suggesting. While the average of polls was around about right, Biden on 51%, they did underestimate Trump's support nationally by 3 to 4 percentage points. And some of the state-based polls were way, way out, as we've discussed on Planet America, particularly some of the Senate races where Republicans like Susan Collins in Maine won easily after being behind for most of the year. But those, of course, are the public polls. The campaigns do a lot of internal polling of their own, and the Biden team were saying for months this was always going to be a lot closer. So here to talk about the polls, public and private, whether they're working or what's wrong with them, is Bob Shrum. He's a former Democratic presidential campaign manager for the likes of John Kerry and one of the most legendary strategists and speechwriters in American politics. These days he's based at the University of Southern California, from where he joins us now. Bob Shrum, welcome back to the Fireside Chat.
Happy to be here.
For months and months, the Biden campaign was warning that their internal polls were showing that this was going to be a closer election than the public polling was showing. Was that just kind of warning against complacency, maybe trying to raise some money? Or in fact, are internal private campaign polls really that much better than the public polls we see in the media?
Well, internal private campaign polls are usually more reliable because you put a lot of energy into them. You have to get them right. Your political life is on the line. But I don't know that they were showing the race where it's going to end up, which is at about 4.3% lead in the popular vote. And they certainly didn't want their people to become complacent. So the truth lies somewhere in between.
Bob, the University of Southern California ran 2 kinds of polls. They ran a more standard kind of poll, and they also ran what they call a social desirability poll, which is like the Trafalgar style, where they're trying to smoke out shy Trumpers. You got a good look at both those systems. Which do you think is more accurate in hindsight?
Well, in this election, the social circle asking who your friends and neighbors are going to vote for turned out to be much more accurate. It was 4.1%. And as I said, I think Biden's going to win by 4-2 or 4-3. It's not what Trafalgar does. I mean, they do reweighting to what they think the electorate is actually going to be like. We don't do that.
Can you explain the kinds of questions that your poll was asking and how you get around whether it is the notion of the shy Trump voter or the sort of overly enthusiastic Biden supporter locked down and keen to talk to pollsters, whatever the distortions that may be in there?
Well, the social circle question was an experiment for us. It's been used elsewhere. It's worked. We used it before in 2018 and 2016. And it proved remarkably accurate, I think, because you flush out Trump voters who are not responding to pollsters. You're essentially asking people who know them, how are your friends going to vote? How are your neighbors going to vote? And B, it enables people who are actually going to vote for Trump to say that they're going to vote for Trump without saying it. It's a kind of a safety net question, and it worked very well. There were people who said they were undecided. I don't think most of them, and they broke for Trump. I don't think most of them were undecided. I think they just weren't telling pollsters they were for Trump.
So do you think the social circle form of polling is a Trump special, or do you think this is the future of polling, full stop?
We have no idea. We'll have to wait until we have a Trumpless election. Right. One thing that should be said, by the way, is Biden's 4.3% margin in the popular vote will be the largest of any challenger to an incumbent since FDR in 1932. This was not a close election, but despite all the noise the Trump people are making trying to overturn it, and they've now reached the point where they want state legislatures to appoint electors contrary to the way people in their states voted.
Bob, I don't know whether this is causation or just simply correlation, but it does seem to me that a number of the places where the biggest polling misses happen, not just at the presidential level, but also in some of these Senate races, were where there were masses of money being spent, $100 million on some Senate races and so on. Could that be part of the clue to that sort of social desirability factor, that you increase the stigma of voting for Trump if somebody just spent $100 million bagging Trump on the TV for the last 6 months?
But we also had races that the polls got wrong, for example, in South Carolina in the Senate race, where both sides spent an enormous amount of money. Jamie Harrison, north of $100 million, Lindsey Graham, about the same. And I think that the outcome there was more a function of the trends in the state, the feeling of the state. Trump won the state handily, and voters were not going to split their votes.
So do you think, Bob, that we're in a position now where we shouldn't pay so much attention to the polls while we're working out what's going on, and maybe there's some other metric that we should use to try and work out what the people think?
I will bet you money that the next election around will pay a lot of attention to the polls. The pollsters are going to try and fix whatever was wrong. Maybe more people will use the social desirability question, the social circle question, but we're not going to go away from horse race coverage. I mean, people have been decrying it for years, saying, oh, let's have more coverage of the issues. And then what ends up on the front page of the paper or the lead on the television? Well, the latest poll shows X, Y, and Z. And with maybe a story on climate change, like 5 pages later inside.
One of the things that we are seeing very much now, Bob, with online fundraising is the nationalisation of state elections, not just like the Georgia runoffs coming up in January, but a lot of these high-profile Senate races. A lot of the money was coming from out of state. What are the lessons there in terms of the effectiveness of money if, as you say, there are some just fundamental demographic realities on the ground in places like South Carolina, where it was always, no matter what the poll said and what the bank account said, Jamie Harrison was going to really struggle to beat Lindsey Graham there? Yeah,
but if you're in a Senate race and you can raise a lot of money on the internet and you can raise a lot of money in small contributions and from people who feel very strongly, you're going to raise it, you're going to spend it. And money is not irrelevant. In fact, the only way to prove that it would be irrelevant would be, let's say the fundamentals are working in South Carolina in favor of the Republican candidate. So don't spend any money. See what happens. You'll probably lose.
Moving on to something which we've got hard figures for now, which is the actual vote. There was figures coming out this week about how Biden actually did comparatively worse in the city areas, in the urban areas, than in 2016. The Democrats did in 2016, but cleaned up in the suburbs that are more traditionally Republican. What does that mean going forward for the Democrats? Is that replicable with someone who isn't Joe Biden?
We'll have to see. But first of all, he did only a little less well in some of those urban centers than Hillary. What happened was suburbs where people had voted for Trump in 2016, let's give him a chance. We want to shake up the system. They were appalled by what they saw, and they came out and they voted against Donald Trump. And that was the key. If you look at Pennsylvania, those suburbs around Philadelphia, Allegheny County out where Pittsburgh is. Same thing is true in Michigan. Same thing is true in Wisconsin. Same thing is really true in Arizona. I mean, Maricopa County, which used to be reliably Republican, voted for Joe Biden. I mean, no Democrat has carried Arizona, I think, since Harry Truman in 1948. And suddenly Joe Biden has.
Bob, we've obviously seen a pretty remarkable election, a high turnout election, up 13 to 15 points nationally. How much of that ultimately do you feel, and obviously we won't know for a time, but do you feel was down to the motivating force that is Donald Trump for both sides of the aisle?
I think Donald Trump was the great get out the vote machine for Democrats, and he was the great get out the vote machine for Republicans. But you also have to give the Biden campaign credit. They had a very disciplined message. They stuck to it. You didn't read stories in the paper about infighting inside the campaign. You didn't have people engaging in power struggles. So Biden, who was written off before the primaries last November, just kept right on going, stuck with his game plan, never changed it, cleaned up for the nomination, and then pursued the same disciplined approach in the general election.
Do you think, Bob, that this election busted the myth once and for all that Republicans can't be competitive in a high turnout election? Or do you think we need to wait and see in a non-Trump environment? I
think we probably need to wait and see, but it is true that when you're looking at non-college educated white voters who tend not, or many of whom tend not to vote, a lot more of them came out in this election. So we may have busted that myth. We'll just have to see.
Bob, there have been an awful lot of hot takes over the last 2.5 weeks as to what this election meant, different people kind of forcing it into a template of preconceived ideas. What do you think should be the takeaway from this, or is a takeaway that perhaps people have not really identified?
First takeaway is that Donald Trump is only the fourth president in 100 years, incumbent, to not be reelected. And that is a kind of stunning repudiation. And he lost by a lot more than other people have lost in these circumstances. So that's my first take. The second thing is I do think that a majority of the country, and let's not forget, Biden is going to get a majority of the vote, which Clinton never did, either election. He was under 50% both times. Biden's going to get a majority of the vote, and I think a majority of the country wants to go back to a more normal, less stressful kind of politics. Someone said to me the other day, I'd like to get up some morning and not have something the president is tweeting be the first story on my television news.
Bob Shrum, always a great pleasure. Thanks very much for your time once again.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for the Fireside Chat. Planet America will return in 2021 in time for the inauguration of America's 46th president, Joe Biden, or for the coronation of Grand Poobah for Life, Donald Trump, whichever happens first, Chaz.
The Pep Podcast is also going to be back next year too. We've got one more for this year, right there. But in the meantime, I'm getting a whippet. George here is going to have a new buddy.
Did you hear that, Georgie? It has been a difficult year for many of us, of course, particularly when there have been extended lockdowns. And we have appreciated you tuning in to see us each week. So to express our thanks, one last time, can we present the bopping white cat and company? Bye-bye.